In consciousness, the ideal state exists as a conceptual background. So you could say that whatever you think about in terms of different things, different experiences, different events, different types of people, whether you go into nature or into museums and listen to music and culture in general, I think there's always the ideal being projected from the background, and by implication, hierarchically, you're always looking up to the ideal. You're always being guided by the ideal. And so you could say the ideal could be a kind of morality, or doing something beautiful, doing something orderly, doing something loving, doing something with compassion and understanding. So you could say that the ideal in consciousness, in thought and concept, is a reflection of the spiritual perceptions of love and beauty and truth. So we're trying to live up to the ideal within our consciousness, which itself is a reflection of the holistic nature of the One. So that realm by Plotinus was called the intelligible realm. So the realm which is based on principles and ideals, etc., the Platonic archetypal realm, would then cross the threshold into the psyche as the inspiring ideals that the more conscious mind interprets in various cultural forms, such as poetry and music and philosophy and science. So these are all extrapolations from what I would call a soul essence, the kind of essence of your personality, the essence of your functions of consciousness. So just as the solid matter contains nuclear energy, the nuclear field, so a book contains the meaning, the words that have the meaning, the inner essence. And of course, the culture, music, art is an expression of the personality. If you equate the psyche itself as the domain of personality, which would be persona. So if you died and went into your psyche, there would be a continuity of consciousness, and you would be extending your persona and living through that drama, and you will change the various masks as you go through. So you go through life changing the mask and identity of the ego in consciousness, and you carry on in the psyche doing that. And then there's the idea that you can come out of the stream of consciousness in the psyche and enter nirvana, the resting place, shunyata, emptiness, the one mind, the diamond body. So if you follow the golden thread woven by the imagination in terms of your life story, the kind of golden thread of meaning, in one sense, should indicate the spiritual influence of illuminated light. So something draws you towards certain literature, to various aspects of nature, to the dream, to the vision, to the revelation, synchronicity. Certain kinds of music, certain buildings attract your attention, and that magnetic psychic attraction is to reveal to you innate tendencies, innate needs of your soul. So the soul is nourished by the essence of the personality that's expressed itself in the world as culture. So you want the essence of Mozart, the essence of Plato, the essence of Einstein, and the essence of Picasso. So our soul is nourished on that essence, that nectar of the gods. And the self in turn is nourished by the fact that the soul realizes its essence. The personality has lived through and understood the karma, has understood the vicissitudes of life, the human condition or the human drama. We're each living through that. We're learning our part. And doing the right thing, of behaving in the right way so that we carry out, you might say, the spiritual mission of self-realization. I mean, growing up, right through university, I didn't have any ideals that I can think of. And it's only when I became spiritual that I began to have ideals. You know, the ideal of being initiated and working through the initiation and understanding the problem of self-knowledge, or the problem of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in many respects I feel I've realised and actualised that ideal by completing my spiritual life. Because the spiritual life is really the life in your identity, in your consciousness, in your ego, of going through a process and getting it right. You know, you paint a picture, you stand back and you think, is that picture right or not? Is that relationship right or not? Is the place I'm living right or not? Is the food good for me? Etc. So self looks on and sees whether what's happened in consciousness, what's happened to the spiritual, the identity of a spiritual person in my own case, and whether I feel I've completed the work, which I do. And to a certain degree, I believe I've perfected the work, say, in extension of Carl Jung, in my mythological work. So in my consciousness, my karmic history, my karmic fate, my karmic duties, I believe I've actually lived up to what was expected of me. I've, you might say, served the Grail. I've served the mission of the Logos, the mission of the Godhead, in living out my own divine drama on the world stage, within and without. And now that I've seen through the veil of Maya, seen through my own thought illusions, my own story, my own myth, my own fable, then that work completed, I don't know what to do now. I don't actually know what the next step will be. And usually in my life, I have plenty of forewarning, I have plenty of precognition. I've had dreams that in detail have described where I'm going to live, the street, the houses, the buildings, the museum and what's in the museum. In every detail I've had that prophesied. And yet I can honestly say right now, it's a blank sheet of paper. I don't seem to have any premonition at all of what the next step will be beyond the label spiritual person. So if I'm no longer seeing my life as spiritual, then what is it? What lens am I using? And I would say that the fact is I'm not using any lens, but I can't say what lens I'm using, but I'm using my intelligence, my spiritual perception, to gain insight into the next step. And how that insight works is through being aware, being attentive, and leaving things open. So when you look down the microscope, you're able to look objectively so that you can see any discrepancy and any change and any detail that you missed, or relationship or consequence that you missed. So I'm looking, you might say by implication, for the next step in terms of what's going to actualize in the world. But I can't even begin to think what would the first indication that this new step had been taken. How would I identify the first indication, and therefore freeing me from the past of, you might say, having removed the mask of Maya, or the many masks of Maya, the multiple personality, multiple identity, etc., the fabric of consciousness and world, the world stage or the world theatre, then you might say, having put aside identity, having put aside the mask, how then would you function in the world without identity and without mask? And what kind of personality would be functioning? And I think personality without persona, in the sense of wearing a specific mask, I think would mean that you're wearing the mask of a human being that's living a mythic life and is moving into, you might say, the space of the one, which is in Zen Satori, in Zen enlightenment, that would mean the original face, that pulling back the multifaceted veil of Maya, veil of illusion. You see in the mirror of the mirror-like wisdom the reflection of your own face, which is your original face, which is the face without the mask. So all the masks of the gods are the ideal states of mind, and the original face is the original innocence of the child before ego consciousness and ego identity took over and occluded the original face of the divine child. So when you imitate and aspire towards the ideal figure, the ideal God, the ideal principle, the ideal state, and in a sense the pupil becomes the master, your limited self becomes the ideal, and in that realization then there is a unity or union between the ideal of the Lord or the Master and the projection of the ideal by the initiate or the student in self-knowledge, then that whole mythic drama no longer pertains, because then you've, in a sense, dissolved the division, you've dissolved the problem, you've dissolved the whole notion of becoming. And really, whatever happens in your consciousness is simply a necessary metamorphosis of identity or transformation of consciousness. And in that learning process, in that school of thought, you follow the precepts, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open unto you. So you're searching for an answer, you're searching for a solution. And you might say, learning to tie up your shoelaces, once you do it, you tie the knot and you can go, you can walk. So once you might say, tied up the knot of consciousness, which you could say the knot is the figure of 8, which is infinity, and the infinity, you could say, are the winged heels of Mercury, and the volatile mercurial spirit is, you might say, one who could put on the wings, or the angelic wings of the messenger of the gods, which has facilitated through Mercury and Hermes, the psychopomp, the whole initiation process, the whole metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, or the scarlet worm into the phoenix. So they say about the butterfly that within the chrysalis that's transmuted out of the caterpillar, they call that the imago. So the mature, perfect image, the imago, is really the ideal. So the ideal of the caterpillar was the butterfly. And caterpillar and butterfly are inseparable, just like the child and the adult is inseparable. The male and female is inseparable. Nature and culture is inseparable. the Earth and the solar system and the galaxy and the universe are inseparable. So when I think of living, and I think pretty much all my life I've been a person that's lived in the present, that means I live day by day. And I don't seem to be concerned with the psychological factor of what you might call the Freudian psychology, the kind of conscious, self-conscious states of mind and states of behaviour. So I live in the present without worrying what happened yesterday. And living in the present, you could say you have a choice whether to project an ideal or not. But you can't get away from the fact that whether you project an ideal or make a free choice to idealize something in your future relationship, a future plan that you've got, so even if you think you can bypass the issue, escape the responsibility, the duty of making that choice and being responsible for that conscious choice, if you don't make a conscious choice, then that ideal will operate anyway, or some ideal from the past will operate. And that will be habitual. Once it becomes memorized, it becomes biased and ritualized. So if I finish with my spiritual life, which had become habitual, ritualized as a process of initiation or individuation, now that the transformation has been undergone, if I'm beginning to peck away as the butterfly or the phoenix within the chrysalis or the golden egg to be reborn, then I don't know what the reverberations of my consciousness day by day is bringing about in the world. Because in the past, a lot of my spiritual life has depended on the reverberations of synchronicity or the reverberations of dreams and visions and revelations in the world. Now that seems to have stopped. So I'm wondering what the reverberations of beginning to crack open this limited crystallized consciousness. And of course the butterfly feeds on the nectar of the flowers, what I call the nectar of the gods, or the honey of the gods. Because that's often synonymous with the elixir, the preserver, that gives immortality to the mummy. So the butterfly is a symbol of the soul is the personality is consciousness is knowledge. So as you come out of the golden egg or the golden sheath of the chrysalis, then you are a personification of the spiritual perception, the winged spirit, as it were, Mercurius. And Mercurius uses the soul essence in the world in a holistic way, so that you might say Mercury, or the messenger of the gods, is mediating for yourself in the one, mediating in the mercurial consciousness of thought, which is free of the illusory nature of Maya, so that thought no longer is in service to the past, is in service to knowledge, but is really now aligned to wisdom, the body of wisdom, the diamond body. And that makes consciousness transparent as the soul essence. So the soul essence is part of the crystalline structure of the diamond body, or the synchronistic holographic crystal, in which each facet contains the self, or the totality of all selves in reality, on any dimension, on any level, in any universe. All selves are always at one with each other and the one, whether you're conscious of that or not. That's the divine template, the divine synchronistic, harmonious, sympathetic field in which selves have their being and existence in the one. So we're all really functioning from a spiritual dimension, and the work is to transmute the caterpillar into the butterfly, or the scarlet worm into the phoenix. That is the process of initiation, individuation, and that's the primary myth, or the embedded myth in the whole fabric of thought, the whole fabric of knowledge. So all systems of knowledge, science, music, philosophy, all put together, the image, the word and the number, then that microcosmic fabrication is no longer veiling the necessary insight, which will, you might say, indicate the next step. So if you're living to the Dharma or the Tao, that means you're living according to what is right, the law, the great one. So rather than living to the law of karma, which is the cultural conditioning of consciousness, you're living to the law of the Dharma, the destiny. I mean, if I had, say, in my future, an ideal projection of myself as a person who's talking about their life, not in spiritual terms, which is what's in my books, but in a way that myself as an individual is sharing my autobiography, my life story, which is really essentially the content of memory. And the reason I'm telling that story as a human being, that fable of my own myth, is because that is what the human being is a culture-bearing being. So you're a tree and you're bearing fruit, and you might say it's there for the picking. So if you're walking through the countryside and there's an apple tree and it's not within a garden, as it were, and it's just kind of free range, then you can pick an apple from that tree and enjoy eating an apple in total freedom in the countryside, which is really what I like to do, is just pick berries and fruit and all kinds of things and nuts. So what is it, what's the distillation of your soul essence? What's the distillation of the meaning of your personality, the meaning of your psyche, the meaning embedded in knowledge? What's the wisdom you want to share with the world after a distillation of 50 years? Well, it would no longer be an idealization. So I wouldn't be talking in terms of what I would want the world to become or what I would want other people to become, because I'm no longer in that sphere of becoming, which is the pupil becoming the master. Starting at the base of the pyramid and climbing to the apex, which is hierarchical and evolutionist within consciousness. So if you're walking about with no reference to hierarchy, no reference to the systems of knowledge in consciousness that are the really, you might say, as I say, the nourishment of the caterpillar or the pupil, because the caterpillar goes inside the pupa, which is the pupil, and in the imago, which is the perfect image, the ideal is the master. But all that's been burnt to ashes, the veil of Maya, is the ash from which the phoenix arises. So the phoenix arises from the dead ashes of the past, of your memories, of your history, of your story, that's embedded in the myth of the human species, which you could say, in one sense, is embedded in the myth that's emerging from the psyche, which is the soul and the personality. So again, you could say, when we create culture, music and art, that is a symbol of the phoenix coming out of the egg, or the butterfly coming out of the chrysalis. And when you yourself are being born of that chrysalis or golden egg, then that's the same as Buddha being born of Maya, the cosmic mother. Because Buddha is born of the knowledge of his past, of his identity, while he was on earth. And he's being, in a sense, reborn as the Buddha. He's transcended his past. I think the whole universe, the planets, the stars, all of nature, I feel, is a kind of cosmic ideation, a cosmic idealization of a creative process. So when we paint pictures, you could say, well, somebody painted the landscape, whatever beings created nature, they painted it, they sculpted it, they imagined it, they intellectually constructed it. So right down to the quantum field, you could say that the intelligent design is in the whole cosmos as an ideation of the mind of God, as it were, or the gods. And likewise, we in turn, the self is the one, and we create through consciousness culture, which is, you might say, a mirror image of the Creator creating nature. And when we go, the self goes to the transcendental realm of the Buddha, the enlightened one, then we ourselves return to the intelligences of the one, out of which the creation of the universe and the creation of the psyche has come forth. So however you look at it, as pupil and master, or self and the one, it's a similar reflection. So just as the self lives in the spiritual dimension, yet functions in the psychic dimension, functions in the physical dimension, so the intelligence functions in the physical universe, functions in the psyche as the one. So there's always and everywhere the presence of the one. So even if on planet Earth, before the human being came along, the one would have been implicit in the whole cosmos. And that means that the whole cosmos would be working on the spiritual principles of the Logos and Eros and justice and truth and beauty. And so everywhere we find order, we find balance, we find beauty, we find love in terms of Eros being the god of relationship, the god of friendship. So the love that interrelates everything, that is really the binding factor in the whole physical and psychic structure of the human being. I think if you're using your consciousness to project an ideal, or let's put it this way, the background effect of consciousness, it is an ideation, is an idealization that informs each identity as to what is right, as to what kind of order or context any specific identity lives within. So a child will learn about its context, a student will learn about its context, and each individual learns about the various contexts of their psyche, their context defined by thought and knowledge and experience. So you're, in a sense, you're always working through a problem, you're always working through a puzzle or a paradox. box. That is known as the labyrinth. So if you come into a relationship with another person, then the idealization will be projected, and so you'll be looking for something that will indicate the ideal. It might be in the way the person looks. So you think a woman looks beautiful, so that's a projection of Venus, projection of the goddess of love, the goddess of attraction. And you're attracted to the essential beauty of a woman, and that can take the form of an ideal. So a lot of celebrities are the idealization of beauty, for example. But then you've got other celebrities' idealization of intelligence, and so forth and so on. So just like I'm looking for the indication of the next step in my life, and my consciousness will idealize that. But because I'm no longer concerned with the spiritual content, then this new content in this unknown territory, I don't even know what the map looks like. I don't know what the format looks like, or the relationship, where I'm going to live, what kind of people I'm going to meet, even what I'm going to talk about, now that I don't really want to talk about what's in the books. I just want to be creative. I want to speak, you might say, in the present, spontaneously, just as I might write a poem spontaneously in the present, or paint a picture. So I want to paint a picture in my mind of the world I'm living in the present, as I'm living it. So I want to say what I'm living. I want to directly experience, out of the wholeness of my being in the world, from a holistic point of view, I want to use consciousness in a transparent way to reflect the intelligence of the One. So I want to be intelligent, not through the medium of consciousness, but intelligent in the very act of expressing myself. So there's no mediation, there's no obvious mediation. So it's not a matter of simply remembering, although you have to remember to access the words and the systems of knowledge and layers of history and self-story. You need all of that when you're talking what you might call, in many respects, the soul essence of my spiritual life. So I'm using the soul essence distilled within consciousness, and using that, you might say, golden thread to weave together creatively a brand new timeline that's never existed before within my life. So if identity transforms into other identities and goes from pupil to master, or from caterpillar to butterfly, then you might say, what is the actuality as seen and heard in the world of someone incarnating directly spiritual perceptions that inform speech and behavior with a holistic point of view? What kind of idealization will that create in another person's consciousness? because people will idealize unless they're free of the idealization process, unless they're free of the pupil-master relationship. Then when you communicate, you know that they will be symbolizing that, interpreting that, and internalizing that within the ideation process. So they project an idealization onto you, onto what you're saying, be structuring in a hierarchy, be selecting certain terms, keywords, of say a spectrum of value, a spectrum of meaning, as you would reading a book. But what I'm saying, what I'm doing, is not reading a book, which is a kind of static kind of memory, and you're in a sense you're remembering what the author thought themselves, and you're hoping to distill a kind of soul essence of meaning within the book. So I'm trying to get myself in the right position where I can divine the moment-to-moment unfolding of this new path, this new pattern, this new world or new world order, according to what is right, the Dharma, the Tao. But I hadn't even made that first step. There's no footprint, there's no way of knowing what to do next from day to day, because there's absolutely no first sign. So on the blank piece of paper, there's no sign yet of what the world I will be living in, the world I will be creating spontaneously, what that world will be. Will it be countryside, or will it be city? Will it be this country or another country? Will it be this person or that person? And I know in my past, synchronistically, all these anomalies, all these strange things happened in my life, extraordinary things happened the whole 50 years that moulded my symbolic life, with all kinds of magical effects. And now there seems to be nothing. It's like all levels of the psyche are in abeyance, are not playing the game of Maya. So there's almost no resources, there's no potential, there's no background, there's no history to what I should do with this new kind of life. And so, from the self's point of view, I'm looking with the intention of getting it right and making that first sign, of that first sign telling me or informing me the beginning of a map, a beginning of a plan or mission, or something that I'm part of that's being made in the world, which is like a new world order. And of course the new world order always starts from oneself, or from the individual. So Einstein created world order in a magnificent way, both literally, technologically, but also affected tens of thousands of people, scientists, and gave them work to do. And that's what a master does. A master gives the pupils things to do. So you have Buddha and Jesus, they had that kind of mastery that other people could learn to do. And so Jesus said to his disciples, go out into the world and do more or less what I've taught you. But I don't even know at the moment what wisdom is, what it means to speak from the perspective of wisdom and not the perspective of the book or knowledge. So I'm using living speech as the means of voicing wisdom, as it were, like an oracle. But the oracle is simply a description of a creative way of divulging the truth. So you could say all of the cultural icons of music and art and philosophy and science, they're all ways of divulging the truth in consciousness. And then you might say Jesus taught in symbols to his disciples as master to pupil, but in himself, when Jesus was alone with his spiritual being, as it were, then being at one with the world, being at one with the cosmos, being at one with all things in reality, then that kind of cosmic order, as it were, that would mean that individuated person, that integrated and incarnate person, Jesus who incarnated Christ, Siddhartha Gautama, the incarnated Buddha, when you are at one with the Buddha, in the one, then you're no longer the teacher of wisdom, you're no longer the teacher of symbols, the teacher of knowledge, but you're living the spiritual life as I say, as a kind of living oracle. And that oracle is to be interpreted by other people in their own way. And if that oracle is symbolically based, is based on revelation, is based on intelligence, then the speaker of wisdom, the seer, should be able to ignite within the person, through the power of language, what would be the essence of the teaching, the essence of the pupil-master relationship. I mean, if you're learning the piano, then the teacher, in a sense, has already accomplished and completed what the pupil is learning. So at each step of the way, through the progression of becoming a pianist, then you might say the ideal, the master, the teacher, in symbolic form, knows each point of initiation along the way, can point out what's good or bad about that particular aspect of transformation, of learning to do something well, to do something right. That's right with the teacher, it's right with the pupil, it's right with the world in terms of performing the music in front of other people, it works well in the world. It has cultural significance. I think that I feel I'm on the threshold of something that I don't know, which is literally the future anyway. For all of us, we don't actually know the future in that sense, maybe in a very limited sense. So synchronicity or chance can come in, the contingencies of the drama and everything, so you can get lots of influences and effects. But you could say, well, what is it that needs to be said today? And I feel that part of what needs to be said, as I seem to be seeing it as I'm talking, about the threshold, about coming out of the chrysalis, of being reborn, of being liberated from consciousness and Maya, and finding one's Buddha nature, you could say, what is it each person wants to manifest in the world from a spiritual perspective? What have you embodied? What can you give to the world out of yourself? And that can only be known by the individual. So I would say that on the threshold of the dawning of a new world, microcosmically in the individual and macrocosmically in the collective consciousness of the world, then yes, you could say that we're each looking for signs. The signs of things to come, the signs of this new order, the signs of the emergence of absolute love and absolute justice and absolute truth and absolute beauty, the absolute nature of the One, in which all selves are one. So you could say, looking out for the transcendental object, looking out for the transcendental intimation or sign, looking out for the sign of the rainbow, which is the sign of the butterfly, the sign of the phoenix. Which is the transformational process of consciousness, the metamorphosis of the caterpillar, of the pupil into the master. So we're very masterful at technology, we're very masterful at capitalism, we're very masterful at democracy and that kind of thing. So what is spiritual mastery today? What does that actually mean? What is a spiritual master in that sense? What do this new race of people need to learn? What is this new consciousness all about? What is the next step for humanity? And I think it is this idea of crossing the threshold and bringing into being spiritual perceptions that give the individual the confidence to stand alone and not feel that they have to prove anything in their consciousness or become anything in their consciousness. Simply be true to your spiritual nature and look for the way to manifest these spiritual qualities. Look for the signs, look for the indications, the effects in bringing about illumination, enlightenment in other people to this fact of rebirth.